It all begins in a small house surrounded by a brick fence. A richly dressed, fat, unpleasant-looking man, a lord, says inappropriate, lewd things to a beautiful blue-haired girl named Beatrice. The girl replies that he is wrong about her, encouraging him to have a further unpleasant conversation. Her father, a viscount, yells that she says terrible things, and she responds the way a girl supposedly should. The honor of a girl's family depends on the girl herself as well. She insincerely apologizes for giving her body and soul to a young man she met at the academy. Out of sight, the viscount apologizes to the lord for her. The lord is outraged that the viscount has praised his daughter and asked for a dowry for her, saying she will bear a clever son. The girl, hearing all this, shows them a locket with a round stone in the middle. This is a test for innocence. If the stone lights up red, the girl is pure. The locket glows red. Beatrice, triumphant, runs away. She is furious that the lord started saying such nasty things about her the first time they met, angry at him and her father. She studies diligently at the academy, and they only value her body as a bargaining chip. Turns out, it's not Beatrice. It's a girl in her body who has been in a car accident. But instead of dying, she finds herself in a novel she recently read, of which Beatrice is a character. The secondary villain, a lord, is supposed to be Beatrice's husband. He abuses the poor girl terribly, and her parents gave up on her in exchange for a lot of money. In the end, Beatrice took her own life. She turned out to be a minor character and was needed in the narrative only to show the cruelty of the lord. The protagonist of the manga, a girl in Beatrice's body, is happy to have gotten to the beginning of the novel and avoided its sad ending. She has memories from her real life and was able to deceive her father and lord with the help of a locket. Now she is ready to move on to the next stage. We are introduced to the second main character, a silver-haired, handsome man named Ruslan Itenas, the Northern Duke. The protagonist says that she sent him a proposal letter since he is her senior from the academy. She gets her act together and tells him that she wants to enter into a marriage contract with him. She clarifies that the contract term is only a year, and they will be divorced in a year. He asks about the reasons for this proposal. She tells Ruslan that her family, the Aroses, are currently experiencing financial difficulties. Their businesses are failing, her older brother has failed his business management exam and has lost his motivation to work. And due to these difficulties, Beatrice's father has decided to sell her to an influential family for a good ransom. Of course, she doesn't want that fate. Her father doesn't give up and still tries to sell her no matter what. It turns out that in the original novel, Ruslan is interested only in a certain protagonist, so he will divorce Beatrice exactly a year later without any thought. She thinks to herself about a backup plan. If he refuses the contract, our heroine will use the information she knows as bait for Ruslan. Suddenly, Ruslan agrees to the deal. She stops him with the words that he should have been outraged, shouting that this is a crazy idea, tearing up the contract, overturning the table in anger. He's surprised. She admits that she thinks the idea is crazy herself. Ruslan says that if it were anyone else, he'd say no. But he and she are from the same academy, and he signs the contract at the specified place. Our heroine is surprised by his agreement, but urges herself not to complicate things, so she has already departed from the original plot of the novel, and so signs the contract. In joy, she asks to go to his house because she doesn't want to go back to her parents' house. He phlegmatically agrees. He suggests that she go first, and the carriage is at her disposal, but he himself needs to finish the job first. Our heroine herself does not believe that everything went according to plan. Gloatingly, mentally says goodbye to the Viscount's family. She plans to divorce Ruslan in a year and live happily abroad. She was in for an unpleasant surprise. The castle of the Northern Duke, a huge, unfriendly Gothic castle surrounded by skulls, warning signs, and circling crows. And a couple hours before arriving at the castle, a warning sign stands in the path of the self-named Beatrice's carriage that the road leads to the castle of the Northern Duke. The sign literally threatens the travellers with death. Moreover, the carriage is followed by the passing girls and whispered, saying, "Is it the unfortunate bride of the Duke in the carriage?" Beatrice superstitiously notices someone whispering about her, but she is distracted by the beautiful sight of a flower tunnel on the path. She sees in her mind the Duke and the girl under this tunnel. He asks her to come closer, to smell the scent of wisteria. Beatrice doesn't realise what she just saw. Maybe it was a memory of the real Beatrice. She started to ponder the vision, but immediately forgot it. But now they have arrived. She is happy that she has escaped from a poor family and that she will live happily ever after. And then she finally sees this ominous castle. She turns to the coachman and asks hopefully if this is definitely the castle of the Northern Duke, but he has already fled. She has no choice but to go inside because she has nowhere else to go. She knocks on the door, but it opens by itself. Beatrice speculates that in the movie, the first traveller who enters a place like this is the first to die. And if he really dies here, in whose body he will be reborn, she ponders. To Beatrice's seeming delight, she sees the maid and calls out to her excitedly. But the maid has a ghastly, partially decayed face like a corpse. The next moment, the maid vanishes like a ghost. Beatrice begins to think she is hallucinating. She reassures herself that she is just imagining things. But then she sees a ghostly skull hovering above her and faints from the overwhelming horror. She wakes up in her nightgown in a bright, well-furnished room. Next to the bed stands an old man with a moustache and a pince-nez. The man notices that she is awake and apologizes that they have not had time to finish preparations for Beatrice's reception at the castle. He introduces himself as Edward, the butler. Beatrice screams and points to a skeleton in a maid's costume. Edward replies good-naturedly that it is Elizabeth and that she will be Beatrice's personal maid. He adds with a smile that Elizabeth is shy but good at her job. Beatrice asks the butler if he is a ghost too. The butler laughingly replies that he is human. When Beatrice asks him why the Duke's castle is haunted at all, he wonders if she doesn't know anything. There are many monsters in the north. At some point, the north was taken over by an exorcist, and coincidentally, a friend of the first emperor. His name was Ashur-etenas. Ashur banished all the monsters to the farthest corners of the north, and for this, the emperor granted him the title of Duke. After acquiring the title, Ashur-etenas built this very castle, in the place where the entrance to the netherworld, the Ghost Gate, was sealed. It is because of the fact that the Phantom Gate has the property of attracting all dark forces, all the evil from all over the world gathered in the castle. After a while, the ghosts became bolder and began to show themselves to people. As a result, all the servants fled the castle in fear. The only one left is him, Edward the butler, who has hired the wandering ghosts idly as servants. Left alone, Beatrice is terribly angry, because since this is a so-called haunted house, she should have been more careful when drawing up the contract. She tries to figure out what to do now. She decided to try a method from her past life. Scatter salt and red beans around, hoping it wasn't just superstition in these parts. Suddenly Elizabeth, who had been peeking under the door before, crept toward her. Beatrice felt the stare and turned around. Out of surprise and fright, she hit Elizabeth because the face she used to be. An awkward pause. Beatrice pulls herself together and apologizes for her prank. Elizabeth turns around and leaves, slamming the door. Beatrice sits down on the edge of the bed in despair and realizes that her precautions, salt and red beans, will not help in the fight against the ghosts. Just then, she hears a delicate knock on the door and sees the skeleton's hand reaching under the door for a note and fluffy, cozy-looking white slippers. The note says that Beatrice will be sore from stepping on salt and beans, so let her wear these slippers. The girl assumes that Elizabeth is a good person. Still trying to defend herself against the dark forces in the castle, Beatrice obtains a cross and garlic. She reasons that since the novel is Western, it must help better than salt and red beans. Suddenly, an elderly woman appears from behind her shoulder and pounces on her with a rebuke. After a moment, she explains to Beatrice that she is peeling the garlic wrong. It is better to try it another way. Beatrice tries to find out from the old woman when she appeared in the room, trying to understand why she did not hear footsteps. The grandmother leaves without explanation, complaining, "Oh, child." But already at the door, the old woman turned around, twisted her neck inhumanely, and squealed that the soup was too salty. Beatrice runs away in wild terror, with tears in her eyes, and realizes that although she has escaped from her mother-in-law, her grandmother's ghost is in the ill-fated castle Beatrice has fallen into. Our heroine decides that under such circumstances, it is impossible to live in the castle, and decides to leave. She's not going to die that way. She reasoned to herself that the contract had not been notarized, that there was no wedding yet. She is frantically thinking about what to do next, since she is now practically a nobody. We see the Duke in his study at night, a week later. It is a huge room, with a desk at which the Duke is writing letters with a crow's feather. Beatrice bursts in on him, screaming in her nightgown. She demands that he sleep with her. He asks her with a serious look if she knows the meaning of the words. She, embarrassed, assures him that she didn't mean anything objectionable at all. He invites her into his office, rather than stand on the doorstep, and asks her what's wrong, because the wedding is in a couple days, which means she didn't come to him for affection, so to speak. Beatrice confesses to him, now that he has returned from the capital, that she can no longer stand the ghosts that come to her at night and keep her awake. He clarifies if it is the maids who come to her at night, but she says that because of her screaming at the sight of them, they don't come to her at all anymore. Beatrice says that she hears the sounds of crying as soon as she starts to fall asleep, and then the windows in the room open abruptly, and something devilish begins to happen. She begins to scream with anger, and in response the portrait hanging on the wall takes on menacing features and stares at her intently. Ruslan says that he will burn the portrait immediately, since he threatened her, and that Beatrice should wait for him in the study. But she is shocked by his decision. He says that since the portrait scares her, he'll get rid of it. But she tries to talk him out of it, saying it's very expensive and it's not the portrait's fault, but the ghost's. Beatrice asks him to calm down and assures him that she just wants to sleep peacefully, and she would feel more comfortable with him by her side. Ruslan, hesitating, asks her again, looking her in the eye, if she would really feel more comfortable with him around. Beatrice hesitantly replies that she would. Groaning, Beatrice yawns and says she'll go to bed first if that's okay with him. He lets her go and says he'll sleep on the couch. Later, he looks at her sleeping on the bed, pensively runs her hair through his fingers, turns around and tells the ghosts in the form of blue, fiery substances that they shouldn't have built a castle in this place. It was necessary to first destroy the ghost gate and burn all the ghosts to the ground. He continues to talk to him and informs him that he did not leave them in the castle out of sympathy. He left them in the castle because he was too lazy to kill them. Orders them out, says his patience is at an end. Obeying his will, the ghosts noisily disappear. Ruslan again looks at Beatrice, who is asleep with his head down. He wishes her a good night's sleep, calling her his fiancée, and touches her hair, which is scattered on the bed. Next, we see a beautifully dressed Beatrice. She is reasoning about the necessity of the wedding. She decides that since the Duke insists on it, so be it. She is surprised that despite the obvious rush, the dress fits her perfectly. The butler appeared in the doorway and said it was time for her to go out. She turned around, slightly startled, and agreed with him. She steps out of the tent onto the red carpet leading down the aisle. On either side of the walkway are the dressed-up guests, who applaud and smile at her. The Northern Duke, in a ceremonial white tuxedo, holds out his white glove-clad hand to her, smiling mysteriously, looking her in the eye. The priest reads out everything that is supposed in such cases. They exchange rings. The Holy Father tells them to seal their marriage vows with a kiss. Beatrice thinking to herself, with some apprehension, that after that, she and Ruslan will officially become a couple. Ruslan pulls the veil back from her face and whispers that he's glad to see her again. Beatrice perplexedly asks him what he has just said. He says nothing, and covering his eyes, reaches up to kiss her face. At this point, the priest declares the marriage consummated. Later at the wedding banquet, sitting next to Ruslan, Beatrice begins to regret this marriage. She thinks about the fact that so many guests came to her and Duke's wedding, despite her fear of ghosts, only to have Ruslan notice them. She and Ruslan have to stay seated at the main table, as it is customary to accept congratulations from all the guests at a banquet. Beatrice is already tired of it. Ruslan noticed this and checked with her, but she assured him that she could be patient. In response to this, he, having previously apologized, suddenly picked her up in his arms, with words to the effect that he was taking his bride and leaving the banquet immediately. Beatrice is perplexed, tries to stop him, saying that people will misunderstand, but he silently takes her deep into the castle. Ruslan drops her on their bed and gets down on one knee to take the shoes off her feet. He asks if her feet hurt, but the question sounds rhetorical. She doesn't understand how he knew. Ruslan replies that new shoes always make her feet hurt and apologizes for not picking her up before the banquet started. Beatrice reassures him, saying that it is not his fault, that he simply did not have time. She adds that she was happy to show off her new shoes to the wedding guests. They chirp sweetly, jokingly saying silly things. Ruslan says that, if she wishes, he will get all the shoemakers in the world to make her wear new shoes every day. And Beatrice asks eagerly if there will be many jewels on the new shoes. He replies that he will get all the jewelers too. She finally interrupts the flow of banter by saying that she doesn't need so many shoes, and shoes with jewels would be miserable to wear. He continues the flirtation, saying that he would carry her in his arms every day if she would let her feet not touch the ground at all. At the same time, he frankly looks her straight in the eye, kneeling in front of her and holding onto the folds of her dress. He made Beatrice blush, and she refuses, saying that people will think the wrong thing, but she herself thinks how good Ruslan is. It was as if he heard her soap and asked her again, but she waved it away and began to say that since they were back in the room, as he had told all the guests. But she didn't finish. The Duke misunderstood her words and was about to undress. Beatrice shouted to stop him, saying that storks bring babies on their wedding night to couples that hold hands. He turned away, saying that he would finish the banquet and come back, and that she should go to bed in the meantime. Beatrice agreed, but thought to herself that she was doing the wrong thing. In the morning, the Duke, with frank boredom, together with Beatrice, accepts the wedding gifts. In particular, a very rare red pearl from the land of Lemnos. The batch of such pearls is only a few dozen. Only one such pearl is mined once a year. Beatrice thinks to herself that looking at these gifts, one realizes Ruslan's status, because they were sent by the Duke's subordinate families. Ruslan notes that Lemnos should have applied for a tax reduction due to the famine, and yet they sent such an expensive gift. He asks Edward to make a list of all the subordinate families who have sent unaffordable gifts. Ruslan intends to visit them personally later. The butler is enraged, shouting that Felix is not here now. Why should he do it himself? Ruslan arrogantly replies that this is what the servants should be doing. But Edward continues to insist that it will take a few days. The Duke replies that it's no big deal and that Edward can finish it in 3 days. This was the last straw in Edward's patience. He announces his retirement and accuses Ruslan of inhumanity. Beatrice is distraught, afraid that the butler really wants to leave, but the butler begs for a quiet rest. Beatrice tries to stop him. He is, after all, the only living person in the castle besides Ruslan. She rushes over to Edward and forbids him to talk about the pension. She takes the butler's hands and tells him that their rapprochement has just begun. She can't live without him in this palace, and she promises to help him so long as he doesn't leave. Edward tearfully thanks his mistress, and in the meantime she asks Ruslan to go with him to see the families. The Duke agrees, since she wants it that way. Beatrice says she must, in that case, pack quickly and set off. A couple of days later, Beatrice and Ruslan are riding in a carriage. She reasons that it was the right decision to inspect the subjugated lands, since almost all the families were engaged in corruption. They arrived at the last land for the day once. It is a large, whitewashed house, with balconies, arches and columns. The local lord, Horst Kazorf, rushed to greet them. He says he is delighted to see them. When he sees Beatrice, he asks the Duke who she is. He replies that she is his wife. The lord realizes that he has forgotten that Ruslan has recently married and belatedly congratulates the newlyweds. Horst even apologized for not being able to attend the celebration in person. Ruslan jokes with a stony face, saying that it was just a little interlude. With an embarrassed laugh, Horst invites the couple in. They enter a huge hall. Beatrice notices that it is very cold inside. She feels creepy. The Duke asks the lord suspiciously where his wife is. The lord replies, clearly nervous, that his wife is not feeling well, and that she's sorry she couldn't greet them in person. Ruslan asks who it is then. The lord turns around carelessly and sees the ghost of his wife striding straight towards him and screams in terror. The ghost walks straight towards the lord, whispering that it will kill him. The lord is horrified, he can't believe his eyes. Ruslan confirms that it is Kazorf's wife and tells him not to leave his side. The ghost pulls her hands toward them and whispers threateningly that she will kill whoever did this to her. She tells Ruslan to give her the lord, to which he replies that she can have him. He's not protected. Beatrice throws herself at the ghost's feet with a scream. The ghost lunges at her, but the Duke manages to draw his sword and triumphantly cleaves the lord's dead wife with it. Beatrice, sitting on the floor, turns around in bewilderment. The next moment, the ghost is whizzing right through her. Ruslan has no time to do anything but shout Beatrice's name, and the ghost scurries away. Beatrice's memories of the lord's wife come to mind, of her father selling her to Horst, of her father dying and her not having time to get a divorce because the lord kills her. Beatrice is awakened by the screams of Ruslan, who calls out to her affectionately but desperately, urging her to wake up. She opens her eyes, lying in his arms. She asks him about the ghost. Ruslan replies that she has disappeared. She tries to tell the Duke about the woman, but is interrupted by a lord rushing toward them down the hall. Horsey tries to explain himself. He says that the ghost is really his wife, that he supposedly caught her cheating on him and she killed herself. Beatrice looks at him with undisguised contempt as the lord tells her that he did not want to publicize his family affairs, and so held a quiet funeral and lived on as before. Horsey continued to rant that he didn't understand the ghost's self-loathing, but Beatrice interrupted him in turn, yelling at him to stop lying. She says he killed his wife. The lord was taken aback by her audacity and knowledge. He tries to defend himself, pretends he doesn't know what Beatrice is talking about. She shouts that it was he who threw his wife off the terrace, that he shouldn't talk to them. Corse became aggressively defensive, yelling that she couldn't accuse a man of murder without evidence. He ends his tirade by muttering that Beatrice thinks a lot of herself, that she is a fallen aristocrat. The lord didn't notice Ruslan approaching him, and the latter, with a nonchalant face, kicked him hard in the stomach. The Duke tells Kurzov that he doesn't dare speak to the lady like that, and that he'd really like to cut off the lord's tongue right now, but won't do it with fire. He informs the lord that the inspection will be done when his dead wife has finally disappeared from this house. In response, the lord desperately interrogated why she was still here. The Duke replied that she was just hiding. Kizov, desperate, asks the Duke to remove this misunderstanding from the house. He is ready to pay any money. Ruslan scornfully brushed aside his rambling offers of money. Then he asked if the lord had pushed Beatrice right at the ghost. Looking down at the lord, Ruslan said that he would not listen to any requests from people who could not even show basic respect for his wife. He and Beatrice are leaving. Surprisingly, Beatrice herself suggests he stay and listen to the lord, as it is their job to listen to the complaints of their subordinates. Declares with hypocritical pleasure that she and her husband will honour the lord's request. Later, over a cup of tea and cakes, the Duke asks why Beatrice wanted to help the lord. After all, she is the one who claims that he killed his wife, so let him pay the price. Beatrice agrees with him, addressing him respectfully by title, but doesn't have time to finish. He interrupts her and, with a piercing look in his eyes, asks that she address him by his name, not his title. She stoops, for in high society only couples who are married for love address each other by their first names. Does that mean he likes her? She pondered. Maybe they had something with the real Beatrice, though it's not in the flashbacks. He, looking at her encouragingly, tells her not to be tormented by reflection, for they are now husband and wife. Beatrice is at a loss for words, thinking about how handsome he is. Pensively, she tastes the dessert and is delighted by its flavour. Ruslan said he ordered a dessert especially for Beatrice. She wonders if he wants to get closer to her, since he ordered a dessert just to her liking. She reasons to herself that a good relationship between them won't spoil the contract, though she doesn't understand why he's so nice to her. Again, she addresses him by title. He interrupts him again with a request to call him by his first name. Beatrice was embarrassed again. She had thought him a typical Duke of the North, cold to everything and everyone except the only woman she loved. But she was gradually changing her opinion of him, looking at him and his actions. She continues to express to Ruslan her thought that she was not going to help Corsa. After all, he had asked them to get rid of the spirit and protect him. Her cunning solution begins to dawn on the Duke. She adds that exorcism is not the only solution to the situation, and that the Lord will regret asking for their help. Beatrice and the Duke ask the locals about the pairing of Horse and his wife. A resident said that there was no kinder person in the world than the Lord's late wife. She said that Lord Horse had seemed polite and benevolent in the past, so much so that Lord Jongdae believed him and married his daughter to Horsey. But after Jongdae's death, the scoundrel revealed his true nature. He went on a rampage wherever he could, and Madame had to solve the problems he created. One day, he became so dissolute that he brought some woman of dubious occupation and origin into their home. The woman sighs, feeling sorry for her late mistress. Beatrice, meanwhile, thinks she has underestimated Horsey's villainy. Later, she and the Duke argue about what to do. Beatrice says that everything is obvious. The Lord stole his wife and then killed her to marry his mistress. Ruslan says it's because only the Emperor is allowed to have 2 wives by law. Beatrice agrees. The reason is clear. Now they're going to start confiscating everything he's managed to get. They write a letter to send to the tax office. Soon, a tax collector comes to the chorus. The man introduces himself as Cutter. He is a tax official of the Empire. Horsey is in a panic. He is told that the IRS has received a letter saying that he is, in fact, not paying taxes. He doesn't realize what's going on as they make their way inside the house. One of the workers finds the Lord's safe. It's not a simple safe, it's made of adamantium, which means it's stronger than steel. Horace gloats that it can't be burned or broken. But then one of the tax officials gracefully pulls out a lockpick and opens the safe in a matter of seconds. And inside the safe is a hidden ledger. The Lord is angry and confused, and they read aloud his exorbitant spending. $1 million gold for a garbage can, $7 million for ink, and so on. While his lands get preferential treatment because he applied for it. But he himself spends money on expensive nonsense. Cutter sarcastically remarks that since his lands are poor, Horsey himself must live a cramped life, giving him a friendly pat on the shoulder. With a smile, he jokes about the Lord's friendship with the local tax director. Still with the same smile, he offers to tour every corner of the estate, and they'll start with the $1 million trash can. A couple of days later, the Northern Duke and Beatrice come to Horse's house again. The Northern Duke and Beatrice arrive again at Hosea's house a few days later, and ironically notice that the atmosphere is much more modest than it was on their last visit. Ruslan says it's none of his business. She gives him a card with a magic symbol written on it. He explains that it's a talisman against evil spirits. He tells Horsey to burn the card in his dead wife's room. The Lord asks them to wait and runs off to carry out the decree. The Duke then asks, addressing Beatrice affectionately as wife, if that is enough for her. To which she replies that he is a wonderful actor. An overjoyed Horsey returns and reports that he burned the card. Ruslan closes his eyes and says he no longer feels the presence of spirit in this house. In a burst of relief, Horse throws himself on his knees and bows fervently to the Duke, repeating his words of gratitude. He wonders how else he can pay for such a favour from Ruslan. Beatrice leans toward him and says with a smile that there is no need for more thanks, for Horsey himself was willing to give anything to rid himself of the rebellious spirit. Horse asks with a touch of fear what she wants then. Beatrice laughingly replies that she doesn't want anything grand. She pulls from her bag a golden rod with a glowing red stone on the end. She lets the Lord know what she sees, his recognition of this thing, for it cannot be forgotten, because it's the rod he used to kill his wife. Horace pretends that Beatrice is talking nonsense, but she doesn't back down. She asks him if he told his wife that he would divorce her, and that she should wait in the room for the time being. The Lord confirms her words. He did indeed ask his wife to wait in the room while he prepared the documents. We're looking at the very night of the murder. Waiting for her husband, and in anticipation of freedom, the deceased wanders around the room. She does not hide her joy. At last she will escape from this nightmare. She thinks he's a crook and a thief. He's taken advantage of her family, and in the end he even brought a mistress into the house. But now she can live happily ever after, with a clean slate. She's a little worried that her husband is taking so long to show up, but here she's gazing up at the stars. She admires the starry sky, remembering how long it's been since she's done that. Meanwhile, the evil Lord slips quietly into the room. She was still admiring the sky, more beautiful than ever, and didn't notice Horsey at her back. He's smiling bloodthirstily and holding the rod above his head, the golden one with the red stone. Having told everything she knows, and she knows everything about the murder of his late wife, Beatrice laughingly praises the abilities of the imperial tax collector. It does not matter, they say, where the money is hidden or buried, he will still find it. She informs Hosea that the bloody rod was among the confiscated items, and the tax collector before his Duke and Duchess personally. Beatrice smiles gloatingly at Horsey and says that they did the right thing by going to this particular official. Horse is angry, so it was they who called the tax officials to his house. Beatrice calmly replies that they were merely fulfilling Horse's own request to exorcise the spirit of his late wife, for she would not have rested if Horse had not been utterly crushed. The Lord fell to the floor with indignation and horror. Beatrice, meanwhile, with eyes full of righteous anger, tells him that, as Duchess, she is stripping him of his title, property, and lands. She adds to a bewildered Horsa that she will report his crime against his wife, and he will have to suffer a commensurate punishment. As she leaves the room, she exhales noisily. Ruslan praises her for a job well done. The Duke went to summon their carriage, and Beatrice remained waiting for him on the stairs, satisfied that all had gone according to plan. In the meantime, Horse, who has never gotten up from the floor, begins to make treacherous plans against Beatrice. He can't believe that all his hard-won gains will eventually lead him to prison. He realizes that Beatrice is responsible for his capture. He is going to kill her to take all the evidence against him. He grabs the stone, thinking feverishly that if he killed one, there's another one. There's no difference. And the Duke wasn't around. But suddenly the Duke appears behind him and brings his hand down heavily on Horsey's head. Ruslan lifts the villain off the floor and says that the only reason he didn't kill him is Beatrice. She wants to sue Horse to pay for his sins. But Ruslan's patience has run out, and he says that since Horse digs his own hole like an idiot, it makes no difference whether he dies here and now or in the dungeon. He abruptly releases Horset's body, and he falls silently, shrouded in a black haze. The Duke moves away. Meanwhile, Beatrice suddenly finds herself in a spacious room filled with sunlight. Behind Beatrice stands Horset's late wife and thanks her. At first, Beatrice did not recognize her, but as soon as she realized who was in front of her, the deceased bowed low and apologized for entering Beatrice's body without her permission. Beatrice assures her that there is nothing wrong with it. The ghost thanks Beatrice, saying that he holds no more grudges against Horsea, and disappears like the morning mist. Beatrice wakes up in her bed. It is dawn. She dresses and leaves the bedchamber. Walking down the corridor, wrapped in a shawl, she complains about the cold, and it is the end of spring. Thinking along the same lines, she walks further down the hallway and suddenly sees a certain cookie jar, a small rag doll, and a note folded in half in the corner. She read the note. Illiterate but warm, it was from the ghosts of the castle. They welcomed Beatrice as their mistress and asked her to eat cookies if she was frightened by the ghosts. Beatrice notices that the gifts have been left very near her room, apparently really meant for her. She takes them in her hands and, opening the jar as she goes, tastes the cookies, feels that they are made with love and are therefore very tasty, even though they are cold, tells himself to thank the ghosts later and that many of them are in the same position as the late wife of the former Lord Horses. A short while later, Beatrice is preparing some kind of medicine with Elizabeth. Beatrice rejoices. She has correctly decided to add mint to improve the smell of the medicine. Beatrice turns to Elizabeth and asks her to sanitize the vial with boiling water. She leans on the windowsill and breathes in the fresh, clean air. She is glad that the weather is not too hot when the medicine is being prepared. We are told that the real Beatrice was incredibly talented and got all the top grades at the academy, and her talent lay in potion making. Potion brewing requires not just magic, but knowledge of the herbs, as well as careful attention to proportions when mixing. It is one of the most difficult disciplines to master. Since pharmacists are almost non-existent, and the demand for potions is only increasing, this is the best profession. There's no shortage of employment in any country, so our Beatrice will have something to live on after her divorce from the Northern Duke. There is a knock on the door, and Edward enters to tell her that the Duke has returned to the castle. Beatrice replies that she hadn't noticed it was evening, and asks him to tell him that she will be down to dine with him soon. In response, Edward says that Ruslan had already eaten dinner outside the house and went straight to bed when he returned. Beatrice looks upset, but quickly pulls herself together, smiling and saying that she can't disturb her husband's sleep and will eat alone in peace, and asks Edward about today's menu. After dinner, she, dressed up, walks sadly down the hall. She thinks that despite her favourite dishes, she had no appetite at all. She cautiously makes her way into the bedroom with Ruslan sleeping. He is lying on the couch in the dark and sleeping soundly. She calls softly to him, but he does not answer. Beatrice decides that he is exhausted, having gone to bed without seeing her. She looks longingly at the sleeping Ruslan and thinks that he shouldn't sleep on the uncomfortable couch. It upsets her. Even after she stopped being afraid of ghosts, he still stayed by her side. She reasons that although spouses should sleep together, she doesn't want to get close to him, since they'll have to break up in a year. She goes to her bedroom, telling herself that she will read a little and go straight to sleep. After a while, she is awakened by a voice. She realizes it's Ruslan, sleeping on the couch. She starts to rouse him to wake up. His sleep is very restless, so she thinks he has sleep paralysis. She struggles to get Ruslan onto the bed next to her. Suddenly he falls. Beatrice cannot bear his weight and finds herself buried by his body. She listens to his breathing and realizes that he has calmed down. But how can she get out from under him, she thinks. Beatrice realizes that now he won't let her go until he wakes up himself, and she has to lie like this. When she wakes up in the morning, still pinned down by Ruslan, she is surprised at how well she slept. She thinks it's probably because of the effort she put into moving Ruslan to bed. She was a little angry at him for continuing to hold her all night, but looking at his handsome face, the anger is gone. She wondered why he was so beautiful, like from a painting. She notices that his shirt is all wet, because Ruslan was in a cold sweat during the night because of a nightmare. Beatrice pulls off his wet shirt, convincing herself that she has no lewd intentions. She just doesn't want him to catch a cold. She's distracted by his beauty again, but she pulls herself back and tries to continue without a backward glance. Suddenly, Ruslan opens his eyes. Beatrice, meeting his gaze, became very embarrassed and began to make excuses, trying to explain that she wasn't trying to do anything wrong, that it was just that his clothes were wet and needed to be removed. He calms her down by misunderstanding her. He says he didn't understand her feelings and promises to be on standby next time. She leaps up even more and screams that she didn't mean anything of the sort, and she screams so loudly that she can be heard outside the castle. Later, they sit together at the same table, eating breakfast, and Beatrice keeps thinking how hard it was for him to explain everything adequately. She does not always understand whether he is joking or not. Ruslan informs his wife that this time he is going with the guard on an expedition to destroy the monsters in the north. Beatrice assumes he means the Iron Blood Guard. It's an order of knights under Ruslan's leadership since he became the Northern Duke. The name is telling. They are clad head to toe in iron armour. The order took a large part in Ruslan's war with the barbarians, in which he personally took an active part. Beatrice reflected, munching on her breakfast, that she had always wanted to watch them. But would she get the chance this time? The Duke interrupts her thoughts, suggesting she choose something as a gift from a faraway expedition. Let her share her wishes. She immediately replies, without a hitch, that she needs the herbs and bones of goblins to create the basics of potions. He asks her about dresses or jewellery, but Beatrice replies that he's given her enough of those already. Ruslan whispers, barely audible, that she is still as indifferent to jewellery. She asks him again, not having heard the whisper, but he pretends he didn't say anything of the sort. A little later, in the courtyard, Beatrice meets a knight in armour. He introduces himself as Ivan, a knight of the Iron Blood Guard, leans over to politely kiss his mistress's hand, but then the helmet falls off his head into the grass. Beatrice sees his head translucent in the sun and says she knew he was a ghost. Ivan had heard that she was afraid of ghosts and didn't want to scare her, but now he was embarrassed to appear before her like this. She assures him that she is no longer afraid of ghosts, and Ivan replies that in that case, he would be happy to go without a helmet. Beatrice thinks, looking at him, that he looks surprisingly fresh for a ghost. They then have a conversation about how ghosts have feelings too. Ivan tells her that, due to life experience, spirits, in some situations, feel the same emotions they felt when they were alive, similar to the phantom pain of a person who has lost a leg. Beatrice laughs, saying that she learns something new every day in this place. They continue to still chat merrily. Next, Beatrice goes out into the courtyard again to see Ruslan and his warriors lined up in front of the castle. The Duke says he was just looking for Beatrice and asks for her hand to passionately put his lips to hers at parting. Beatrice is stunned, and Ruslan tells her that he has thus cast a protection spell on her. She is now safe in the castle even though the Duke is absent. He asks her to kiss his hand in return. She complies. Ruslan tells her that he is now under her protection and will return safely. Beatrice also gives him her ribbon. She ties her red ribbon to his portcullis, saying there is such a belief for good luck on an expedition or in war. Blushing, she pulls his face to hers and kisses him gently on the cheek. She adds embarrassedly that Ivan told her about this belief, saying that all the duchesses of Itenas blessed their husbands in this way. She bows to him and then runs away in a hurry with tears in her eyes. He stands dumbfounded, then sways and nearly falls to the ground. The knights ask him if he's all right, if the expedition should be postponed. Suddenly he's in pain, and there's something wrong with his voice, to which he dryly replies that everything is fine. The guard knights were shocked that day. They hadn't seen this hidden side of Ruslan before. The Duke returned safely to the castle and brought Beatrice the promised gifts. She thanks him profusely. He added a personal gift from himself, salamander skin. Ruslan explains that salamander skin has the energy of fire and can keep you warm in cold weather. Let Beatrice wear it when it is cold. Beatrice mentally recalls that salamanders are the ancestors of dragons and are very hard to catch. Alarmed that the Duke had hurt himself, but she immediately grinned, because he is the paramount character, the strongest in the novel. You don't have to worry about him. Beatrice asked Ruslan if he needed the salamander skin more, since he went on expeditions so often. He replied that he could stand the cold perfectly well, and Beatrice thanked him profusely for the gift. Beatrice asks about the current purpose of the hunt. The Duke says that this time they killed wyverns, which often kidnap travellers and traders on the road, and on the way they met basilisks and killed them too. The butler came in, and Ruslan asked him to call Felix. Felix enters, a neat-looking man, a ghost of course, with glasses and a dashingly twisted grey moustache. He asks Ruslan that he must have brought the money, since he had called Felix. Here he notices Beatrice and bows to her, asking for forgiveness. He introduces himself as the head of the palace's finances. Beatrice introduces herself in return, and Felix apologises for not being able to meet her in person earlier. There was a lot of work in the dungeon. After exchanging pleasantries with the lady, Felix pounces on Ruslan again, asking how much money he brought this time. The Duke sighs and, covering his eyes, replies that they will hold out until the fall. Both Felix and Beatrice had already burst out, which meant only until the fall. Beatrice calculates to herself how this came out, since basilisks are very expensive and wyverns are hard to catch. But why is there so little money? She asks Ruslan to show her the receipts from the monster sales and becomes furious. The prices at which Ruslan sold the creatures are too small. He explains it by the fact that the monsters were not too strong. Beatrice realises that Ruslan is mistaken about the basilisk's power only because he underestimates his own, and so he charges too little for them. She realises that he only seems cool and formidable, but inside he's a mere fawn and will be fooled like that unless she intervenes. Beatrice firmly tells Felix to bring her all the reports on monster sales and the estate's expenditures. Later, Beatrice is at a desk littered with papers, keeping records. She reports that since much of the north is covered by glaciers and mountains, nothing can grow here. This means that taxes cannot support the duchy's budget. There are few businesses in their territory as well, so the main income comes from selling monsters caught by Ruslan. Felix confirms her words and says that he repeatedly told Ruslan about founding enterprises, but the latter kept insisting that there were enough funds to manage the lands. Beatrice sees that the Duke has given her father, the Viscount, a decent sum of money to pay off for her. But she already has a headache. She decides to deal with it later. Felix asks the mistress what businesses they should start. Beatrice replies that they will begin to utilise the natural resources of their lands. Since they have a lot of mountains, they have a lot of resources, but so far they can only mine blue diamonds. This diamond is a stone of magic. It serves to create magical power, as it absorbs mana with infinite power without stopping. Beatrice recalls that in the original version of the novel, a certain Evangeline found these diamonds in the mountains and made them her property. And since Evangeline is the daughter of the prince's right-hand man, the Marquis of LeMay, she will not be impoverished by the loss of the idea of the mines. Ivan enters the room, and Beatrice asks him if he has found what she asked for, blue diamonds. He replies that yes, there are many diamonds at the mountains of Iern. She asks Ivan if it is true that there are many demons on that mountain. He replied that yes, and that's why no one would look for blue diamonds there. She asks how long it will take to clear the demons to start mining. 3 days, Ivan replies. Ruslan enters the room and says that he is the one who sent the demons there, since the mountain is far from populated areas. But if Beatrice asks, he will deal with them right away. Beatrice does not have time to say anything to him. Ruslan promptly leaves. She asks Ivan if the expedition will take 3 days. He replies that yes, if you go alone. He confesses to his mistress that in fact, during the expeditions, they only help Ruslan. The main work the Duke does himself. Beatrice is surprised. Ivan himself said that in his lifetime he was a famous strategist. He can act freely, not being a member of the guard. He says that in his lifetime he was proud and flaunted his power everywhere, albeit to no avail. He says that with strength like Ruslan's, even Ivan is just a gnat. He also admitted that he likes this form because he doesn't like hard work. Beatrice agreed with him with a smile. Next we see Beatrice arriving by carriage in the city, where she is met by a young fair-haired man. He introduces himself as Elliot Icarus from the Temple of Icaros. Beatrice then sends a sample of the blue diamond to the Mages Guild, and after a few days she received a reply. The magicians wrote a description of the diamond, the approximate price, and wished to be the first to buy a batch of them. But Beatrice, instead of answering them, decided to write a letter to the Temple of Icaros. It was organized only recently, but it already has great potential. The master of the temple is Elliot Icaros. In the original novel, it was stated that he takes his job very seriously. Beatrice handed the letter to Ivan, and he tossed it through the temple window. That's how Beatrice and Elliot met. He arrived with the mage, a short lilac-haired girl, Elena Rowan, who looked like she was glowing. She exclaimed eagerly, clasping her hand to her chest, that she would take care of the diamond appraisal today. Elliot assured Beatrice that it wasn't anything personal. He just needed specifics for such a big deal. Beatrice replied to this, with a sly glint in her eyes, that she was only in favour. They went inside the castle, Eleanor, clasping the diamond in her hands and gazing mesmerised at its light, exclaimed that it was a stone of the highest concentration and that they could change the entire production of magical artefacts. She fervently questioned Beatrice about their quantity and asked for permission to examine them. Elliot besought Helena and said that, judging by her reaction, the stones were indeed incredibly valuable. He offered to draw up a contract immediately. Beatrice readily agreed, and they sealed the arrangement with a handshake. Later, sitting at her desk, Beatrice was glad that the deal had gone through quicker than she had anticipated. She never dreamed they would give her so much money in exchange for just 3 years of sole ownership of the mine. Earlier, she had asked Elliot how many checks she should write, to which he had replied with a laugh that no matter how many checks she wrote, the amount would still be less than the profit from the diamonds. At Icaros Temple, everything is already arranged, he added with a mysterious twinkle in his eyes. Beatrice decides to trust Elliot and spend the money to build hot spring roads in their lands. These plans of hers were precipitated by a local dwarf. She tried to convince him that yes, you could boil in the springs on Mount Kirak, but if the water was piped to the Ishelnik, the temperature would drop to an acceptable level. The dwarf began to explain to her that even they, thick-skinned dwarves, found it hard to bear the heat of Mount Kirak, so no one would agree to go there. Not unless it was winter. Beatrice is upset, but Ivan offers his guards to build the water pipes. Because they have a contract with the Duke, they can work outside the castle and they don't care about the temperature. Beatrice asks hopefully if the other knights will agree. Ivan answered in the affirmative, saying that they were bored anyway, while they were waiting for the expedition. Then let's get to work, Beatrice decided. Let them just finish the work inside the Kirak Rift, and let the dwarves do the rest. She would rely on the Ghost Guard. A couple weeks later, Beatrice, Edward, Ivan and Elizabeth gathered in front of a small water faucet. Beatrice carefully turns the knob, water pours out. The others watch expectantly. Beatrice enthusiastically declares that the water is wonderful, just the perfect temperature. Everyone is cheering and congratulating the mistress on her success, including all the ghostly servants of the castle. Beatrice can't even believe it. She thinks something incredible is going on, but she is grateful to them for such genuine joy. Beatrice thinks that in the winter it is now possible not to go to the mountains, for the sake of cutting trees, because there are many demons there. She asks Edward to bring her some spring water to her lab. When asked why, he replies that he wants to learn something. After a while, Elliot Icaros walks into her office. She greets him kindly. He asks why Beatrice has summoned him this time. She happily lays out on the table the potions and medicines she has prepared and announces that she wants to sell them in the capital. She tells me that they are care cosmetics and bath salts using spring water from Mount Kirak. Elliot thinks about it. He hears about a water pipe being built on that mountain. He asks Beatrice if she has made cosmetics using the magma of those lands. She assures him that she has tested everything and is therefore confident in her product. She even offers to try it on. Elliot loved it. He's tried different grooming products but never one so gentle and fast-absorbing. He asks Beatrice who did it. She triumphantly declares that she did it herself. She often wanted to give up in the process, but she did not give up, and one day she succeeded. She points to a pouch. It's a unique bath salt with ingredients from the hot springs, very good for the skin, and this is a very effective hangover cure. That's what Beatrice called Elliot for today. Before she could finish her request, Elliot immediately shrieked that these products should be patented immediately. Beatrice is confused, but Elliot assures her that the goods will sell out instantly and that he is willing to put his name on it. However, he adds, they may soon start selling fakes, so he strongly recommends patenting unique products. It's not difficult. Beatrice just needs to prove that she invented the cosmetics. Beatrice agrees. Elliot offers her his help. Beatrice does not want to be a burden to him, but he charmingly assures her that it is not difficult for him. After all, he was the first to experience her cosmetics. Beatrice cheerfully agreed and relied on Elliot in the matter. He took the necessary documents and was about to leave. Beatrice began to persuade him to stay because it was getting late. If he didn't want to spend the night in the haunted castle, he could stay at the inn. But Elliot laughingly refuses. He says the sooner they apply for a patent, the sooner they can open the sale. He leaves in a carriage, and Beatrice is left still to think at the gate, when suddenly Ruslan comes out of the shadows asking if they are finished. She wasn't expecting him today, for he had said they would leave on patrol today. Ruslan replied that they had already finished. Then Beatrice suggested that they have dinner together. He agreed, and they went inside the castle together. She sees that something is wrong. He's upset about something. Ruslan sadly tells her that he and Elliot seem to be having a lot of fun together. Without thinking, she bluntly asks Ruslan if he's jealous of Elliot. He looks at Beatrice in surprise and turns sharply to face her. She tries to justify herself by saying that she just misspoke. He sadly says that they are only a couple to each other on paper. Beatrice sensed something, and to hide it from Ruslan, lied that she had forgotten about some documents and therefore had no time for dinner. Beatrice rushed away, leaving Ruslan confused. He looks longingly after her and whispers her name. Beatrice scolds herself on the run for the oversight. After all, the original novel says that Ruslan's only love is Evangeline. She was able to make a contract with him only because she got into the world of the novel before the events described in it begin. And once they begin, Ruslan will not even remember about this year. Self-named Beatrice, on the other hand, needs to think about what she's going to do after her divorce, not meddle in the original. But she still has feelings for Ruslan. She is sure that he will not disappear without a trace, as in the original. And she wants to be happy with him a little longer, but she is not sure she has the right to want that. She puts aside all torment about Ruslan, because right now the priority is work. She and the spirits from the guard are gathered in the woods in front of a swanky 5-story house. The spirits are in black capes, she in red. She asks Ivan if this is exactly the place they need. He says that Ruslan stops here on every expedition. This is the house of a crook, the money for which a luxurious house in the village was built, earned by dishonest means. Beatrice says that some have experimented with spring water for 24 hours, and some have gotten themselves such a mansion fraud. At her command, everyone sets out to assault. Inside the house sits Gilbert Roche, a skinny man with slicked back black hair and a long nose. He is counting the money, saying that he has made a good profit today. He thanks some handsome gentleman, and tomorrow he's going to sell the leftovers and have fun. Suddenly the door behind his back bursts apart with a crack. Beatrice's silhouette is in the doorway. The man is furious. He shouts who they are. Beatrice responds by shouting that they have come to take someone else's money. The rogue thinks to himself that 7 magic circles had been placed on the broken door, and that even a magician could not have broken it open without effort. Who is she, he thinks, and shouts that she dare not barge into another's business in the middle of the night. Beatrice repeats with challenges that she has come to collect his money, that he has built a huge building in a tiny village on dirt and is happy about it. When he asks her how she knows his name, Beatrice snidely replies that the names of crooks need to be known. Roche leaps up, yelling that you can't accuse innocent people of such things, and that the door was actually enchanted with higher magic. He warns Beatrice that she won't be able to pay for it with a bunch of gold coins. She sighs heavily at the fact that Roche's simple words are not understood, and waves her hand. And then a guard of ghosts that Roche can't see starts running around the room. Roche yells that there's no need to break things. The spirits begin, laughing, lifting chairs into the air, swinging on the chandelier. Roche himself is lifted into the air as well. He asks to be put on the floor, but Beatrice firmly stops him, saying it's up to her to stop the bloody thing or not. She tells Roche that she will consider the decision to let him go if he tells her where all his money is. He shrieks that the money is hidden in his trunk. Finally, the ghosts release the rogue and he falls to the floor with a clatter. Wiping his face, he thinks that the chest is already protected by a dozen magic circles. He doesn't understand how Beatrice managed to break through the door, but she can't get to the contents of the chest. But Beatrice waves her hand again, and a huge sledgehammer in the hands of one of the ghosts flies into the chest. The scammer can't figure out what's going on. Beatrice looks at the pile of gold from the chest and thinks there is more than she realized. In the next instant, ropes are tightened around the kneeling Roche by hands invisible to him. Beatrice shows him the checks and reminds him that they are checks from the sale of demons, which Roche in turn bought personally from the Northern Duke. The swindler begins to justify that he did not know that he was making a deal with the Duke himself, and if he had known, he would never have done so. Beatrice heartily slaps him in the face with those very checks and screams that such scoundrels are only capable of deceiving gullible and helpless people. She looks at the following papers and sees that despite profits dozens of times higher, Roche has not filed a tax report, which means he's trading illegally. Beatrice announces to the rogue, standing over him, that in the name of the Duchess of the North, she will confiscate all his property. She tells him menacingly that she knows he's hiding something else. Ivan suggests that there is a strange energy emanating from the wall. They approach it. Beatrice feels the wallpaper. Roche starts screaming and begging them not to touch the wall, but Beatrice has already started ripping off a piece of wallpaper. She stands in front of the resulting hole and can't believe her eyes. Later, they set off again. Beatrice rides on horseback, her companions walking beside her. One of the ghosts asks her why they didn't at least beat up the rogue and just leave him like that. Beatrice replies that, due to his serious smuggling and clandestine trafficking crimes, they have taken him to the station and provided evidence of his machinations, so he is in for pure water hell. It turns out that Roche had dangerous magical items hidden in his wall, which means treason. He will be severely punished. Ivan is surprised that Beatrice knew from somewhere that magic doesn't work on ghosts. She says that she realized this because none of the knights were harmed in the basilisk hunt, despite the fact that this monster has over 10 circles of higher magic, and adds that she had more courses of action in store. Beatrice instructed the guards to keep a close eye on the market prices of monsters, because Ruslan was not an expert in them. One of the ghosts replies with a sigh that Ruslan was just taking money from buyers without saying anything, so the knights thought that was the way to go. Beatrice doesn't blame them either, saying that everything will be fine now. Later, in their office, Ruslan sits at his desk and deals with documents, while Beatrice lies on the couch and reads a book. He tells her that he's been asked to appear as a witness in a major smuggling case, and also to handle the transfer of the Swant's estate to Ileshbach, which the Emperor himself had recently taken over. Beatrice is alarmed, in case it's about confiscation of property, but the Duke replies that it is probably not. It is just a pretext, because the Emperor has been waiting for his obedience for a long time. Beatrice mentally recalled that in the original novel, the Emperor had actually wanted to subdue Ruslan, so as not to develop an internal conflict. The Duke had said he didn't want to make the North independent. She asked if they still hadn't developed the North, just to appear indifferent to independence from the Emperor. Ruslan answered in the negative. He would not give up these lands just out of fear of the Emperor. He confessed that he didn't like the North at all, and became a duke only because of the contract with the previous ruler. He asked Ruslan to just manage the lands, not to develop them, that's all. Beatrice realizes that since there was a contract, Ruslan is not a native-born Itanas. He agrees. Told him that due to illness, the previous duke was unable to have an heir. Because of the contract, he couldn't tell Beatrice more about it. He added that the previous duke didn't want to give the title to his bastard brother, so he offered Ruslan such a contract. Beatrice asks how an outsider can become heir to the family. Ruslan doesn't think so, but the past duke hated his brother a lot. Beatrice said that people are hard to understand. The duke agrees, running his hand through her hair. Beatrice is surprised. Was he allowed to tell her this story? It is secret. He gently replies that he wants to be completely honest with her. Then Beatrice asked him to tell more, such as why his face was so radiant. He was embarrassed and said he didn't know and would ask his knights. She laughed and said not to ask. They walk out of the study together. She thinks she really wants to get close to the Duke, but after all, when the original narrative begins, he's supposed to fall in love with Evangeline, or else everything will be fine between them. We see a knight running through the woods in fear. Suddenly he falls, his body not obeying him. A man in a toga and sandals stops behind him. He tells the knight that he is the last one. The man has a bloody sword in his hand. The knight begins to panic, begging for mercy from him, promising that he will never enter God's territory again. We see that the knight was haunted by one of Ruslan's past incarnations. He tells the knight that the decisions are not up to him, that the knight should have thought of mercy before the tower was built, and kills him with his sword. And now there are no people left in the Tower of Babel. It turns out that in ancient times, even before the founding of the empire, people built the Tower of Babel to get into the world of the gods. This angered God, and he sent his descendant to earth. Known as the Sword of God, the messenger killed all the people in the tower and destroyed the tower itself. And many years after the tower fell, the humans created the empire. And to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, they created a temple in it. Over time, however, the greed of the priests began to destroy the temple of God, and people began to whisper that God didn't like the temple and sent his descendant back to earth to destroy it. Some even said they had seen a beautiful man with silver hair. Others asked what beauty had to do with God's messenger. He was answered that this was the case in the legend of the Tower of Babel. The descendant of God was a handsome young man with silver hair, which is the color of the hair of those close to God. Because of these, the priests built another temple and began to offer sacrifices, hoping to propitiate God. They led the little girl into the forest, where Ruslan met her and ordered her to get up from her knees and tell who had sent her here and from where. And she begged to take away the wrath of God along with their lives. He once more demanded that she stand up, and then he cut the restraints and told her to deliver the message. Ruslan told her that if once again people offered such a sacrifice to God, they would not get off easy from God's wrath. The girl hurriedly runs away, and Ruslan decides to sleep, thinking that he has only wasted his energy. After a while, he wakes up and sees the past incarnation of his beloved Beatrice in front of him. She wakes him up with timid questions about whether he needs help. Now already in this life, Ruslan sits at his desk and fills out paperwork. Later, standing by his horse with his guard, he tells Beatrice that he'll be back in a couple weeks. She is puzzled, because the journey back to the castle alone takes 5 days. He won't be back so soon. Ruslan replies, leaning down to kiss her hand, that it would take a couple of hours by air. Beatrice says she won't believe him just because he says it with a serious face, and Ruslan kisses her hand. He asks for a return kiss on her part. Beatrice says of course he told her it was amulet magic, and kisses his hand. She wishes them well on their way, and he bent down for a kiss on the cheek, but she recoiled. Ruslan asks with a smile why she doesn't kiss him on the cheek anymore. Beatrice, embarrassed, explains that Edward told her not to do that. She apologizes for the last time. She didn't know. He denies it, saying it's the right thing to do, to kiss on the cheek for the road. Beatrice is surprised, because Edward said it was wrong. Ruslan smiled and said that the butler was old, and his memory sometimes fails him. He bent down and kissed Beatrice himself. If she didn't want him to, he would do it himself, and he said goodbye. The knights watching them were in shock. One was perplexed as to why the Duke had asked last time if his face was glowing, while the other was genuinely expressing joy for the couple. Ruslan rides away on horseback, the guards on either side of him. Beatrice looks after them. She notices that the weather is hot, which means that summer has indeed arrived. Beatrice returns to their empty bedroom at night, and thinks of Ruslan smiling at her before he left, but she immediately cuts herself off and quickly goes to bed. She dreams she is running through the forest, and someone is chasing her. She thinks it's been a long time since she's had nightmares in this castle. She shouldn't have them again. She is already very tired, but she doesn't even know who is chasing her. She decides to turn around. At first she thought there was no one behind her, but suddenly a giant red snake with glowing yellow eyes appears right in front of her. Beatrice is terrified as to what kind of monster it is. Suddenly the snake opens its mouth, revealing a split tongue and long fangs, and hisses at her deafeningly. Then Beatrice wakes up abruptly. Elizabeth is leaning over her. Beatrice wakes up. Everything is fine. She is in the palace. The dream is over. She notices that it was Elizabeth who woke her up, and reassures her that it's all right. I'm awake. She thanks the maid and asks her not to worry about her. Beatrice stretches and notices that she needs to change her clothes because she is drenched in sweat from sleep. But then she notices Elizabeth's hand and grabs it with a shout. The skeleton's hand resting on Beatrice's arm was grey, almost black. She says that as late as the afternoon Elizabeth was fine. Beatrice realises that the nightmare she had that night was not a simple dream. Hoping for a restful sleep, Beatrice burns special herbs in her bedroom. This medicine used to help her avoid nightmares, but now it has stopped for some reason, and she doesn't know why. She went to bed, hoping that at least she would sleep well tonight. Suddenly, the curtains on the window billowed and Ruslan entered the room. He ran his hand over Beatrice's face, dusting it with golden dust. He looks at the sleeping Beatrice and thinks that his protective barrier can only be ignored with black magic by one woman. Ruslan reflects on the fact that he can't do anything to her without proof because of the contract, leans over the sleeping Beatrice and says quietly that he will protect her this time, even if he is not in her future. The next sunny morning, Beatrice wakes up, stretches sweetly, and gets out of bed thinking that it has been a long time since she slept so peacefully. She recalls that when the nightmarish dream began, she felt some cold energy that chased away the horror, and without knowing why, at that moment, she thought of Ruslan. Later, dressed in comfortable pants and her hair tied back in a ponytail, she walks stubbornly uphill through the forest. She asks Ivan, who hovers calmly in front of her, if they are definitely going the right way. He says he's definitely been over that mountain before. But why does she need butterfly tendrils so urgently? Beatrice replies that only yesterday she ran out of them, though she needs them for the potion she is preparing. The merchant who came to her didn't have them, and it will be 3 weeks before he can get them. Ivan encourages her, telling her that they are almost there. She waves it off, saying that this is the 5th time he's told her that. But he cheerfully points out that all that's left is to cross the road. Beatrice is horrified to see a deep gorge with a river flowing below, which Ivan called the road. She is indignant, not knowing how to cross if there is no bridge. Ivan says that there really is no bridge nearby, you just have to cross. Ivan flies carelessly over the gorge and stops on the other side. Beatrice is terribly angry with him, and he suggests another way. He and another ghost will carry her in his arms. He warns that they have never done this before and might accidentally drop her. Beatrice peeks out from the edge of the cliff and looks at the river. She abandons the plan and asks them to just bring them the herb they need. Then, Ivan reminds her that because of the herb's unpleasant odour, they can't even go near it. Indeed, Beatrice recalls, the butterfly's tendrils repel spirits. She decides in that case to return home, all efforts wasted. She wonders what to do. Just then she hears a voice whispering, "Why won't she wake up?" She turns around. Beatrice sees 2 children, a boy and a girl. They are obviously very upset about something. She calls out to them and starts to approach, and the children clasp their hands, scared, because people can't see them. Maybe she's a hunter. She reassures the children and tells them that she is collecting acorns here. Tell them to call her if they need help. She happily tells Ivan that she has found a butterfly's antennae, and he clutches his nose and walks away. Beatrice is gathering grass. It's not much, but it's enough for her. Here the children do approach her and ask with hope in their voices if she is a doctor by any chance. Beatrice answers in the negative. Then the children ask if she knows how to make medicine. Beatrice answers without too much modesty that she does. The children grab hold of her and beg her tearfully to help them. She agrees, and the children run off into the forest, Beatrice barely keeping up with them. Beatrice walks along and thinks that this far into the woods, she would never have gotten if it weren't for these kids. They ran out into the yard of a small brick house. The fog was thickening around them. The girl knocks on the door and shouts, addressing their host, that they have come. Beatrice goes inside. She notices that the house is very dusty. On the bed lies a gaunt man with long golden hair. The children tell Beatrice that it is their master, and he has been lying there for days. He does not wake up, no matter how hard the children try. Beatrice asks them to tell what exactly they were doing, if it's not too much trouble. Then the girl shows her hands, and they begin to glow brightly. They explain that it is their power, or as people call it, mana. Beatrice asks if they are magicians, but the children say with a satisfied look that they are mana. Beatrice is in a stupor. The children say that mages use mana and change it, and their master says that people like these children are called Hwansu. Beatrice interjects in amazement, for she knows that they are creatures that are the source of life and create nature. They don't usually show themselves to people because they don't like to talk to them. She asks the children who the man is. They answer her that it is the master of the mountain. They both infused the master with mana, but it didn't help. Perhaps because compared to him, they are too weak. The children rush over to Beatrice, shouting that this is why they brought her here, to cure their master. She is taken aback by their assertiveness. She's thinking hard about the problem. It's more serious than she thought. The man's face is pale and his skin and hair are very dry. Beatrice announces to the children that she seems to know what the problem is. They can't believe their ears for joy. She pats the boy's head affectionately and tells him not to worry. Beatrice turns to one of the spirits, Peter, to have him bring her cardamom. It's not rare, so they'll find it quickly. Peter promises to bring it to his mistress at the speed of light. Rolling up her sleeves, she cheerfully declares that while Peter is away, they will clean up. The children happily agree. They were just finished with the clean-up by the time the spirit returned with a bag of herbs. He asks why she needs the herbs. Beatrice, having tied her apron, replies that she is about to cook soup and has just taken the medicine for it. After throwing the ingredients into the cauldron, she tells Ivan, who is looking over her shoulder, that now it all needs to be stirred for about half an hour so that it doesn't burn. Ivan offers to help with this. The children stare mesmerized at Beatrice while she cooks, then come up and ask excitedly if she is a necromancer. Beatrice hesitated. Then she replied that the ghosts were her friends. Then the children rushed to hug her with even more enthusiasm. Beatrice does not understand the change in their moods, because not so long ago they were wary of her. Now they are more than friendly. The boy even climbed into her lap. Later she tells Ivan that everything must be ready by now and asks him to type some. Ivan pajazzes up and says that her best friend would do anything for her. Beatrice is embarrassed and denies saying such a thing. He hands her a bowl of soup. She carefully pours a spoonful of soup into her host's mouth, and the colours return to his face. The children instantly notice that the man's face has brightened and ask if he has recovered yet. Beatrice answers them that she has not yet, but she will bring more potion in 3 days. The master must be fed with this soup 3 times a day. The children understand. Soon, a Chvasu boy arrives at the Northern Duke's castle and informs Beatrice that thanks to her, their master has awakened. Beatrice was overjoyed. She offered the boy to help her carry the potion to the master's house. In the house awaited them, sitting on the bed, the revived master. At last he had met the doctor of whom his servants had spoken. Beatrice starts to say that she is not a doctor at all, but the master interrupts her. He asks her not to be modest because she has helped him a lot. The children pester Beatrice, trying to find out why their master is sick in the first place. He introduces himself to her as Enya. Beatrice asks him when he last ate. He replies thoughtfully that he ate about 500 years ago. I haven't even drunk water lately. Beatrice threateningly declares that this is the cause of his illness. Enya is, after all, a living creature that needs water and food. In 500 years he has been left without strength due to unrecognized hunger and thirst. She explains to Enya that cardamom, for example, is very nutritious and grows at every turn. He can eat it. Enya says she knows that, but you see, mountain plants are unpalatable. Beatrice is shocked and yells at him that he is out of his mind for having such whims. There is plenty of other food in the world, such as fish. Enya, in turn, yells that fish stinks and he doesn't want to kill living things, so he doesn't eat it. Beatrice continues to shout that since that is the case, let him eat cardamom. He shyly admits that her soup was very tasty. She offered to give him recipes for different soups, let him eat them and take health potions. Enya agreed and thanked her. Later, Beatrice finds herself in a strange place, in front of a huge door. She does not realize where she is. Enya calls out to her and tells her that it is too early for her to go through the door. Let her come to him. In gratitude for her work, he brought her into his mind. He tells her he'd like to stay here a little longer, but the god's servants are going to bring him back right now. She tries to ask him what he means, but Enya puts his finger to her lips and cryptically informs her that 3 glasses of water will do. Let Beatrice be careful. Beatrice suddenly wakes up and tries to understand Enya's message, and then he recalls a calamity from the plot of the original novel, the flood that befell the north.